All right, so we are recording, and I'm going to get us started by reading your bio. So Thorben is an independent consultant, international speaker, and trainer specialized in solving Java persistence problems with JPA, Hibernate, and Spring Data JPA. He's also the author of Amazon's best-selling book, Hibernate Tips, More Than 70 Solutions to Common Hibernate Problems. Thorben has been working with Java and Java EE for 20 years and was a member of the CDI 2.0 expert group JSR 365. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure. So I guess from a kicking things off perspective, can you just, other than the bio I just read, walk us through your background in a little bit more detail?
Yeah. So I started about a little bit more than 20 years ago as a student in a software development company, and did the typical company career. Became a normal developer, took up some more responsibilities there, tech lead for a component, managing projects, these kind of things. Then I switched companies and basically did the same there until the point where I got a combination of bored of doing all the things over and over again, and then frustrated about how life in companies sometimes just is, and decided, okay, what's the next step? Do I just switch companies again, or do I try something else? And at that point, I was already blogging for a little bit more than a year, and decided, okay, that is fun. I also had my first talk at a conference and enjoyed that as well, and thought, well, other people are making money out of this and doing this as their full-time job, and I enjoy doing it. Why not give it a try? And did both. So kept my job and did the whole blogging and speaking part for about 1.5 years until I finally quit my day job. And since then, I'm working as a freelance consultant, trainer, author for mostly Java persistence related topics. Now I have an Amazon best-selling book. You can see it there. Have a few online courses that are now part of a membership on my site. And I'm doing about a 50-50 split between working with companies as a coach and consultant and doing some in-house events and doing all the online stuff. And yeah, been doing this since end of 2016 full time.
So I want to look at things somewhat through the lens. I'll ask some questions through the lens of folks in our audience, in our community. The community is loosely oriented around, I guess I'll call it the hustle. Folks that maybe have full-time jobs and are interested in going independent, or who are newly independent, but the common thread being that interest in entrepreneurial ambitions, whether as a side or full-time hustle. So I'm going to focus some of the questions on the aspects of what you've done that probably are most resonant with that group. So for instance, you had mentioned being bored. Had you always been interested in entrepreneurial adventures, so to speak, or did that arise out of dissatisfaction with a salary job? Can you take me through that decision a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, I was always interested in how businesses work. I studied business information science, had a few business classes at school, and I was always interested in that stuff. And then when it was time to get a job, I never thought about going independent. That was just not a thing in my family. And in the beginning, I was happy with the whole thing, being an employee, writing code and doing stuff that was technically interesting. But it didn't take long until I took up more responsibility and basically worked on some entrepreneurial things within a company. So I was still an employee. I still had managers to report to, but there are always some responsibilities or roles within bigger companies. where you have freedom to some extent and where you have responsibility for projects and customers. And I was always interested in that, but never wanted to do that full time. I did that full time for about a year in one company and was really unhappy about it in the end because I was missing all the technical parts. But I was always interested in these kind of things. But I also knew I wanted to do a mix. I don't want to be a full-time manager or right now a CEO of a company who's just managing a team. I always wanted to be involved in the technical things.
Interesting. I imagine that's something that it's something that I've heard a lot from either my readership over the years or people in the community being I'll miss the tech. How do you blend those things? So that's kind of interesting. Yeah. When you mentioned briefly like examples of entrepreneurial concerns within a company that interested you or things that you worked on, like do you have some examples off the top? I'm just thinking maybe somebody listening is working for a company and interested in maybe eventually doing their own thing. Like they might wonder, what could I do that would like lay the groundwork for that? So what were some of those things, if you remember?
Yeah. Well, the most common examples are probably managing projects and customers, so being responsible for the so I worked in companies where we wrote software for other businesses, and there you quite often have a role where you interact with customer. You need to figure out what does the customer need, how does that fit into the product offering or service offering of the company you're currently working on. And how do you create a fit between these two? Mm-hmm. And then how do you communicate that to your customer, to your manager? I also had some responsibilities for the team. So I wasn't their manager, but I had to make sure that everyone was working on the right tasks and the project was on track and these kind of things. And there you have quite a few things that you also have when you go independent. Sure, you then remove the manager you're reporting to, which actually means that all the things and responsibilities that previously you could hand off to someone else are now on your desk, which is good and bad. Depends on what you need to do. But most often it's good. So yeah, it's going independent there was basically continuing what to some extent I was already doing and making sure that I was responsible for everything and that I was able to call the shots, which is great if there are things you just don't want to do, because now I'm in the position to tell potential customer, look, I'm not doing this kind of stuff. I'm not interested in that project. We can work together in these forms, but not like this, which is great because as an employee, you have a manager who does that. And most often that manager is more interested in the company than in the kind of work you as an employee want to do. That's at least my experience with my managers. And now as an independent consultant and trainer, as long as the numbers add up, I can just pass on projects and decide, okay, no, that's not the stuff that I want to spend the next several weeks on, which is great most of the time.
So I think what you were saying about like taking in customer requirements and feedback just reminded me of early in my career travels where I would go on customer sites and help with installations of the software I was responsible for at the time. And yeah, I could echo that too, that like probably being involved in some capacity in sales, like as a sales engineer for a time, or, getting customer feedback, working with customers, those strike me as great examples of kind of more entrepreneurial things you could do to lay the groundwork versus just kind of being insulated and writing software, delivering features, et cetera. So I think that's
That always depends on the size of company where you're working. I was working at a small company. So there I had a lot of freedom, and there were not a lot of other people who could take over that responsibility. So I was able to dip into a lot of different things, and also had to just take over a few responsibilities that in the beginning I was comfortable with, which was a great learning experience, and which is now really beneficial because most of these things I wasn't comfortable with 6 or 7 years ago have now become a regular part of being an independent consultant.
I think that's a great point. I mean, like, I might crystallize that and say it is advice to anyone who is thinking of going independent. Like, you might consider leaving your job at a Fortune 500, working for a small company where you can wear more hats. That didn't directly occur to me, but that's an excellent point. So there was, you said, a year and a half where you were doing both, and I imagine burning the candle at both ends, working a full-time job, and then also growing your business. What was the calculations like to know when to go independent? Because I know there are people listening, people in the community that will watch this later that wrestle with that. Like, I have a thing going on the side. How do I make a go of this? Maybe they're struggling and thinking like, I can never get this business to the point where it backfills my income. Like, how do I bridge that gap? So I'm just, in that year and a half, like, how did you set out and know when to make the jump?
Well, that's a good question. That was a rather spontaneous decision. So at some point in 2015, I started to work on online courses and do my first paid speaking gigs. And that was just on the side. And it was fun. And it took quite some time. And then most of my free time. But it wasn't that much time that I wasn't able to sustain both things, being employed and doing the things on the side. But my side business was growing and took up more and more time. So I reduced my day job to 4 days a week, which really helped for several months. And I made some income there. And we were in the comfortable position that my day job still made enough to pay all the bills. So everything that I made on the side was extra. And we put most of that aside. So at the point where I was, again, working about 70 hours a week, combined with the employment and my side gig, my wife and I at some point said, okay, that has to stop. Having a family, a small kid, working 70 hours a week, that's something that you can do for a while, but not for years.
Sure.
Then, but to some extent, my manager pushed me to the point where we had to make a decision, because I asked if I could reduce my day job to 3 days a week, and they didn't agree. So I was in the situation that I understood that I couldn't keep doing the stuff that I was doing, and the only way out was to either reduce the side gig or to leave the day job. And then I remember I had the conversation with my manager on a Friday, and he said, no, you need to keep working 4 days each week. And then we sat down on Saturday, my wife and I calculated our spendings, had a look at our savings, and made some calculations and recognized, okay, we have savings for more than a year without any income, and I already had some income from the side gig. And there we decided, okay, let's just give it a try. In worst case, I go back to some other employment in 9 to 12 months, which was an easy decision, because at that point I had already made the decision that I would either go independent or start looking for a different employment, because I was just looking for something new. But yeah, with the savings and some income from the side gig, it was No, it wasn't a comfortable decision. It was still a tough decision, but
Sure.
it was something that seemed to make sense. And yeah, we just decided to take the risk
I
and
like the
make the move.
framework there. I mean, for anyone listening, watching, I like the idea of here's how much runway we have and the worst case scenario analysis. So, like, let's say that this goes absolutely nowhere. I can survive for this amount of time. And then here's what I'll do at that time. Like, the failure criteria, the success criteria, and the runway, I think is great. Like, the thing I'd weigh in and say from my own experience going independent is like, if you're an employee, there's no moment when it's just comfortable and you're like, oh yeah, no problem. I'll just switch to be, it's always going to be terrifying. But if you've laid out those scenarios, I think it, is less terrifying than it otherwise
Yeah,
might be. One thing I
it's
wanted to ask about real quick, you mentioned kind of just in passing, like, well, I negotiated down to 4 days a week. Is that common in Germany? Because I think a lot of people listening would be
no,
like, what is this magic you speak of? How did you negotiate one less day? How did
um,
that go?
it that's not common. Um, sure, you find part-time jobs here, but usually not in software development, and definitely not in the role that I had. But well, they knew that I was already doing these things on the side, and at some point I just set up a meeting with my manager and asked, um, would that work for you? How would something like that look like? And I did that when we also, well, once a year I made an appointment with my manager to talk about my salary. And I combined these two things. And in the end, we agreed on, okay, I'm not getting any salary increase. We are
Hmm.
reducing the salary to 80%, and then I'm just working 80% per year, per week, um, which was okay. I mean, sure, the goal is always for these meetings to get more money, um, but in the end, I was happy with the situation because it was the next step on being able to go independent. Um, and I would recommend this approach to everyone who wants to go independent. Start with building your brand and working on the side. Um, you need to check with your employer and the contract that you sign and your local laws. In most countries, I think you have to announce it to your employer. In Germany, you at least have to, and they need to allow that, which they did. And then, yeah, do both things for a while, and then try to gradually shift from being employed to being independent.
So if I could summarize a few bullets, I think key lessons if you want to go down to a 4 day a week arrangement or whatever it may be. One, I think this was left unsaid, but I'm guessing it was true that you had some leverage there. Your employer valued you,
Yeah,
didn't want to lose you. Number two, you won't know until you ask, and you'd be surprised what might happen when you ask. And then number three, be prepared with concessions, not just I want to work less, and that's it. Like I'm willing to take less salary. I'm willing to forego this increase, or whatever the case may be. That you had to offer them something in exchange for some consideration.
yeah, definitely. Um, and do some calculations in advance. So I think in most countries, taxes increase depending on how much money you earn. So taking a cut in your salary quite often isn't as bad as it looks in the beginning.
Hmm.
Because after taxes, I had a little bit more than 80% of the previous income. Um, and well, replacing 20% of the income with a side gig is much easier than going full time and having to replace the entire salary. And it really helps to build up some savings to then do the switch. And that helps a lot if you then need to talk with the first potential customers when you are independent.
Hmm.
Because having money in the bank allows you to be way more not really aggressive, but to request more in your negotiations with the customer, and maybe walk away from a client that just isn't a good fit. And that doesn't work if you're desperately looking for money.
So switching gears a little bit, persistence in the Java world is the niche you settled into. I know one thing that comes up over and over again in the community, in our Slack, and my readership, how do you go about picking a niche is something a lot of people wonder about. So I'm kind of twofold curious, like how did you arrive at the niche that you have, and what recommendations would you have for people who are looking to kind of find their place?
Yeah. So my main recommendation would be pick something that interests you, because you will spend a lot of time on it without getting any rewards in the beginning, especially if you try to build something online using blogging or YouTube or whatever. I got into this niche because at some point I decided to start a blog, basically as a notepad for myself. I knew we had a wiki in the company I was working at, but basically nobody was reading it, and it was difficult to access from the outside. So I thought, well, then just let me write it somewhere. I got a free blog, wrote a few articles, and then recognized, okay, I'm not the only one who's interested in this. And the blog got some traction, which meant I had 20 to 30 readers on a new blog post that didn't mess up the tweets and the sharing the article on DZone and stuff like that. But having 20 or 30 readers is a lot if you start with 0.
Yeah.
Or if you maybe have 2 coworkers who take a look at the new article because you mentioned it in the coffee corner.
I'm just laughing because I can relate, early days of blogging.
Yeah, it looks quite different now. But especially getting started with a blog is difficult because if you have 2 articles on the blog and nobody's reading it, Google doesn't like you. Google likes popular stuff. And a site with 2 articles and then 10 readers isn't popular. So ranking in Google with such a site is difficult, which is why I said pick something that interests you. Because for the first several blog posts, nobody except you and maybe a few other co-workers will really care about that stuff if you don't syndicate it on a huge platform. But I'm sure that most people in your community already went through these things and recognize how hard it can be in the beginning to get an audience. At some point, you get traction if you write about interesting stuff and if you produce good material. So in the beginning, I wrote about a few Java persistence topics because there was a new version of the JPA spec, and I just was interested in what had changed and how these things worked. So I tried it out. I wrote an article about it and shared it on social media and DZone and a few other places. And it got some readers from there, and somehow stick to that topic. I mean, I was always working in the Java backend niche since the beginning. And it just felt natural to write about that. And then I was asked to speak at a conference about that specific topic, and it somehow grew into more. I started to become the Java persistence guy here in Germany. And I quickly recognized how beneficial it is to have a really narrow niche and be known for one specific topic, because it's way easier to know a lot about a small topic. And from a branding perspective, it's much easier because everyone knows if they have a question about this, you are the guy to ask, which is much easier from a branding perspective, in my experience, than being a jack of all trades and just know a lot about Java or JavaScript or whatever. Because there's just so much that there will always be someone who can provide the same material or maybe has more knowledge on a tiny little detail. And if you just specialize in one niche, everyone expects that you are the person who knows all that stuff.
So it sounds kind of organic, but like you were
Yeah.
responding to the market. So I started talking about this topic. It got some traction following. I talked about it more, invited to speak at a conference. The audience grew. And at some point, you determined you'd be able to make a living in this vein. Did you, how did you specifically arrive at creating training video courses? Like why that, or how did you get to do that?
Yeah.
Was it just a natural outgrowth from blogging and talking?
Yeah. So it started with a phone call that I got out of nowhere from someone who I knew from a conference. So at that point, I was part of the program committee of one of the bigger conferences here in Germany. And I got in there by networking and a bit of luck. And then another guy who was also on the program committee called me out of nowhere and asked, hey, would you be willing to give a talk about your topic at my conference? And we pay you for that, and it's a half-day workshop. And to be honest, at that point, I had nothing. I had a bunch of blog posts. And I just said, yeah, sure. I do a workshop, of course. And then he asked for an abstract, and I got a little bit nervous because I had nothing. So on that evening, I sent out I wrote an abstract, sent it out, and got accepted for the conference, and got more questions about that workshop, and it somehow felt natural to create an online course on that because I saw that in other niches people were making money with online courses, and I was thinking about leaving my day job and doing something independent. And in that circumstances, having a digital product that's just sitting there and that doesn't require a lot of immediate work because you have done all the work up front, is a nice thing, and it makes switching to being self-employed much easier.
Speaking of which, so you've gone off on your own. You're creating training courses after making the decision to be full-time independent. Like, what was your day-to-day life like in the early days of the business? So I'm trying to think of people who might be about to do this and they're wondering what it's like. Did you work more? Did you work less? What was day-to-day like?
After quitting the day job, on average, I worked less than before. But less means less than the 70 plus hours that I worked while I was doing both.
Sure.
So my working less was still somewhere 50, 60 plus hours a week. So it was basically still a 7-day week, just not as crazy as it was before. And it took me quite a while to reduce that to let's call it normal working hours. So that was something that I did at the end of 2019. I said, okay, it's nice to not do both as I was before, but I'm still working 50 hours a week. That just doesn't work. And then started to introduce weekends and had closer look at the hours that I was working. But yeah, in the beginning, I was still working a lot less than when I was doing my day job and the side gig, but still a lot of hours, more than the typical employee would work. And that was because there were a lot of things I had to take care of. When you go independent, you get all the admin stuff that you need to do. Marketing, the blog. I was still working on my my next online course, I try to get clients with whom I was able to work, and yeah, it's a lot of stuff in the beginning. It gets better if you make enough to hire someone for some tasks,
Was
which
part of
usually is
that
admin.
was part of the initial push? I mean, it sounds like a number of years, but like working all those extra hours above what an employee would work. Was there part of that that was kind of the excitement of the venture and you'd like, was it a grinder where you're like super enthusiastic, like I'm going to do this, I'm going to make it work?
A little bit of both. It was mostly an enjoyable thing, and then I loved doing that. But depending on how many hours per week you work, at least in my experience, everything at some point becomes a grind. And yeah, that's something that I learned. When it becomes a grind, you need to pay attention to it, because that is something you can't do endlessly. So yeah, it was a mix in the beginning, but I think it was more fun than a grind. It took a while until it became really exhausting and annoying.
So with that evolution, like over the years, have you changed your offering? So if I'm not mistaken, when you started out, I don't know how much other stuff you were doing, like consulting or what have you. Wasn't it mostly coursework? And so you built a bedrock of courses on your site. And then how have things evolved, I guess, over the last few years with your offering?
Yeah. So when I started out, I did mostly training and the online courses. I always said I don't want to be a consultant who's at a customer 5 days a week. Because I have family at that point. At that time, son was still very young, so I wanted to have at least some time with my family and kid. So I didn't want to go the typical independent consultant route and be on the road 5 to 6 days a week. And that was why I did mostly my online courses and the training. And now I'm doing a mix. Still doing some training. I'm offering consulting and coaching services, but most of that online, which means I'm working remotely with other teams and helping them improve their persistence there, which was a great thing to have all that in place when the pandemic started, because I was already used to that, and I could tell my potential customers, look, I'm doing this for a while. It's no difference than before. And the pandemic helped moving more of this stuff online, basically everything, which is something you probably need to get used to, and which you need to want to do. I know a lot of people would prefer to be on site and have face-to-face conversations with people. But for me, with family and how I like to work, it's much easier to do that remotely. So yeah, now it's a mix. It's doing consulting, live training events with customers, and the online part.
With the evolution of doing consulting, which I imagine is pretty lucrative, do you find that having the brand, having the courses, the presence, teed up charging premium rates versus, like, let's say you had just gone off on your own and said, I consult in this, is it a lot easier to command more money with all of that built up?
Yes, it's much easier, but it's much harder to sell a lot of days. So I know other independent consultants who charge a lower daily rate, but they sell several months in one package to a customer, which works if you can do a lot of different things.
Yeah, that sounds like staff augmentation.
Yeah, basically. I go to the customer and tell them, look, I can solve this problem, and we would take, I don't know, that many days for this. And there we are talking about a few days. Quite often it's, my standard coaching offer is 4 half-day workshops spread over 1, maximum 2 months. And within that time, we are able to solve their most pressing issues in their persistence layer. And I can charge a nice premium on that because I'm providing something that other consultants can't provide. But I also only sold 4 half-day workshops. So someone who's selling 100 days of consulting work probably makes more from one client, but also has to work there for 100 days. So I'm happy with the situation that I'm in. And I would recommend to specialize on a specific topic because then you are able to demand higher rates. And at least to me, it feels like that makes the whole situation a little bit easier.
Sure.
But that also means you need to be able to deliver. If you are charging a high rate and position yourself as the expert on that topic, you need to be able to really answer the questions. And I think I couldn't tell my customers, yeah, I get back to you in 2 days. I need to do some Googling first. They expect that I know how to solve these things, which makes these short-term engagements way more exhausting than a normal software development job. But that's okay.
Sure. A lot more pressure. I can relate to that from times I did management consulting in the enterprise. Like you don't have a lot of time to get up to speed and you've just got to trust that you're going to be able to figure it out.
Yep.
But I imagine that confidence comes with all the years of specialization and expertise. Do you sweat that like before you go in? Are you worried you won't be able to?
Oh yeah. I was worried about these things in the beginning and then quickly recognized, okay, I've built up a lot of expertise on these things just by doing all the teaching, writing. When I started, I had already written several dozen blog posts. I had been doing this kind of thing as an employee for several years. It was more that I had to learn how much I really know about this and trust in myself. But it was always someone who said, who has the mindset, okay, if this is scary, but ignore all the bad feelings, I'm convinced that I should be able to do that, then we do that. And that has always worked out for me so far. Yeah. But that probably depends a little bit on each and everyone, and everyone has to figure out for themselves how they want to approach this. But yes, it's scary in the beginning, and that's totally fine.
So in thinking about the people, who might be interested, imagine that somebody's you 6 years ago or something, or in a similar position. How do you think people would know if the type of business you have is right for them? Say like largely expertise instruction based, creating courses and then maybe doing some consulting, that model. How would somebody who's listening and thinking about that identify whether doing what you did would be a good fit or whether it's not for them?
I think the first question everyone should ask themselves is, do I enjoy teaching? Do I enjoy standing in front of multiple people and explain something? If I don't enjoy doing that, then this is definitely not the right thing. And when thinking about that, try to ignore that you are nervous and that standing in front of a crowd is scary and everything. That's totally normal. speaking at conferences for several years now, and I'm still nervous before a talk. I'm not sick for 2 hours before my talk anymore, but I'm still quite nervous, and I know other speakers are in the same situation. So that's just how it is. But I quickly recognized that as soon as I started with my workshop or talk, I'm really enjoying this stuff, and that helps because it makes the whole experience easier for yourself, and the audience recognizes that you're comfortable in this situation and that this is the stuff you want to do. And the next thing that's important is try to find out if people understand what you are explaining. Is it something that comes natural to you or not? I don't know why, but for some reason that comes relatively natural to me. Nothing done for that. That's pure like that. Just works. I don't know why. I can't explain it. And if that's the same for you, and you want to do these kind of things, then I would recommend, go for it. Give it a try. Do it on the side and see how it goes.
That's interesting because it is seemingly like this mode of instruction seems like it's uniquely easy to try versus, like, I don't know, do you want to like do tandem skydiving instruction? Like there's a lot of effort that goes into that vocation. But I think that's an interesting point. So, do you enjoy, first of all, the mode of instruction? And then secondly, does it seem to work for your audience?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and then both things are things you can easily try. You can do that with a YouTube video. Record a few YouTube videos. Do a live stream if you have some kind of audience. Submit a talk or workshop to a conference. If you haven't spoken at a conference, submit a talk to a local user group. Not 100% sure how it's with other programming languages, but in the Java space, at our Java user groups, we are always happy to have new speakers, and it's quite easy to find someone who's mentoring you to some extent. If you say, look, I want to try this, I have an interesting topic, I just need some help preparing my talk. It's most Java user groups have someone who's doing that, or just reach out on Twitter, and you will find a few speakers who are more than willing to spend a few hours to talk with you about your talk and the preparation.
So I think we're getting into this territory a little bit, but like, let's say somebody does like this and does have some success with these early modes of experimentation. They're like somebody who's going to go and start a business creating info products, training. Like what advice would you offer them for getting started past just figuring out whether it works for them or not?
To keep that job for a while, make sure that it works financially, and that you have saved enough money to live off that for a while. I mean that always depends a little bit on age and your family situation and everything. But for my wife and I, it was much easier to handle all the stress that comes with going independent, because we knew that we would be able to pay rent and food for a while, and that really helps. And then, while you're doing it part-time, try to estimate how much money you actually spend and how long it would take to get your income from your then full-time independent business to a level that it's sustainable. And then at some point just make a decision. Either go all in and decide to quit your day job and do your independent whatever job it is, and then just run with with what you got and then try to grow to real business, or or if you decide that's not what you want to do, then look into other employment options where you might be able to do the same thing. In my case, with all the speaking, if I don't want to be self-employed, I could look at developer advocacy roles, for example, where I would be paid to write blog posts and speak at conferences and stuff, which could be nice.
So this is kind of like something that just popped into my head as we've been talking, but versus when you started doing this back in 2015 or even before, as you were laying the groundwork, is the landscape different than now? Like, meaning if somebody in 2021, almost 2022, is going to go into a similar business, do you feel like it's become saturated? Is it harder to do now than, when you were an earlier mover with it?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit harder than it was. So I started blogging in 2013. Yeah, in 2013. At that point, there were not a lot of blogs out there for Java development topics, or at least not a lot of blogs that brought new content on a regular basis. And that made it probably a little bit easier to get started. The whole environment now is a little bit more competitive, I would say. But the software development niche is huge, and I think we are far from reaching any caps there. I would say we still have space for new people in that niche, but you need to be more intentional, more consistent, and more professional with your overall approach. I think if you just decide to set up some blog and maybe write an article every 2 to 6 weeks and being totally inconsistent, that will probably not work anymore. I mean, it didn't work well back in 2013, but it will definitely not work now. And that makes it definitely a little bit harder than it was back then.
So with your business, what do you see the future looking like, over the next 5-10 years? Like, what are your goals? What do you see happening?
Yeah. That question is hard to answer. Things are changing incredibly fast, which is a really interesting thing of my current business. As I explained earlier, I'm not doing what I did in 2016 anymore. Well, some things are still there, but the whole business has changed a lot. And we are talking about 5 years. And within these 5 years, I think I did 2 or probably 3 major changes on what I'm offering and how I'm offering it. But still based on the same brand, on the same core parts. But especially in the delivery, there were huge changes. And I did the last one 3 weeks ago when I opened up my Persistence Hub membership, which is something that I think will be the model for the next several years. So in the past, I did online courses, and they were totally self-paced. I answered questions if someone sent me an email and was supportive to my students and everything, but there was no real interactive part in it. Students were not able to talk with each other, or there were no live events. And that now changed completely with the membership. We are running 3 live streams a month, have a coding challenge on the 4th week of the month, and a forum and everything. So there the focus is much more on having people work and learn and grow together, and having the whole thing more interactive, which also makes it easier to include other things like questions from work, like experts from the other experts as guest speakers and stuff like that, which is, I think, something that we'll see more and more in the future. More interactive parts, more things where we do things as a group of people. And I saw a huge shift in interest to that, especially now during the pandemic. It was there before, but I think a lot of us recognized over the last 2 years that not having to commute to the office is great, but sitting on our own in some room in our flat for 8 hours a day, that sucks. More interactive, group-oriented programs, I think, are the next big thing in our niche. And I hope that I'm offering exactly that with the new membership. We will see. In addition to that, we will, of course, still have all the company-specific in-house offerings. I think that part will not go away. So consulting and in-house workshops will definitely be a consistent part in our niche.
I want to wrap and get to Q&A, but before doing that, along the lines of what you're talking about, the community and your site, where can folks go to see more about you, learn more about you?
So you can find my blog at thorbenjanssen.com, or you go to persistencehub.com to find the membership. Both you end up on my site with the blog and ways to get in touch with me. Yeah, that's probably the best and easiest way.
Sounds good. So with that, I'll throw it open to the live Q&A before we head over to the Slack. So I'm going to trust that everybody can unmute themselves to ask questions and throw it open. So if you have something you want to ask, feel free to unmute and ask a question. Sometimes it takes a minute or two.
Yeah. And I also opened up the chat window here in the course. So if someone isn't comfortable to unmute themselves, feel free to post it there.
Question?
Hey. Hi. Thank you for what you shared. I just started doing consulting myself this year. And I have a question about, especially you mentioned that you basically prefer high-ticket engagements to have a higher day rate over more days but a lower rate. But I presume that this also means that you have multiple clients, or you have more clients, not just one bigger one. How do you juggle having multiple clients? I am in a similar situation, and sometimes I find it a bit difficult to do context switching and say, okay, now I have to work on this client, now I have to work on this client, and sometimes it gets a bit overwhelming. And any advice for that case?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think my main way to handle that is that I try to avoid having multiple different clients on the same day, because that gives me usually a night and a few hours maybe in the morning to do a context switch, which makes it much easier to catch up on the latest emails and to basically forget about the conversations that I had with the previous client until I need to remember them again because I'm working with them again. But at least for that day, all the stuff that I discussed with the previous client is, of course, not helpful. So having a night or evening off in between is helpful. Besides that, it's always a matter of scheduling. If you have multiple clients in parallel, it can be difficult to keep all of them happy because, well, there's no way to be in two calls with two clients at the same time. So you somehow have to handle that and convince them that it's good like that. And that what helps there is that I make it pretty obvious that I'm highly specialized and that we will not work together for ages. This is a relatively short-term engagement. We are working on a specific problem. We are solving that problem. And well, if they know that we will work for a day per week for the next 1 or 2 months, then they know that there are other clients. And they know that it's probably not that easy to reschedule their day and stuff like that. And that helps. Because usually the client is then also hoping that I'm working with other clients at the same time, or that I worked with a bunch of clients before that, because that's where I got all the experience from that they are benefiting from.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? Feel free to unmute yourself. Roland, if you have another question, you're welcome to ask. Give it a second here.
Yeah.
Fire up the AMA in the meantime. Whoops. Open up Slack. So anybody else going once, twice? I guess we can call it there then and head over to Slack. Thorben,
Yep.
Thanks so much for the interview. It's been really interesting to chat. We will get this produced and up on YouTube, hopefully in the next week or so. I'll obviously keep you posted on that. And yeah, thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it. I will hang out in the Slack channel for a little bit. So if anyone has any question, just ask it there. I will do my best to answer it. And yeah.
Well, thanks, Thorben. I will talk to you relatively soon, and to everybody else. Catch you next time if you tune in for the series, and take care.